The first lie the overseers told was that humanity's sun was dying, and that only they could save us. The second lie was that we were too fragile, too chaotic, too divided to ever endure such a storm without their hand to guide us. And the third lie, the one that burned deepest, was that our survival was not worth the effort. They came from beyond the dying light, their fleets shimmering like knives across the skies, draped in banners of conquest older than our species itself. We called them dynasties, because no human tongue could pronounce the endless syllables of their empire. They arrived with promises carved into fire, towering machines that harvested oceans and cracked cities, and they bound us not with chains, but with despair. They ruled through inevitability, and what is more inevitable than the death of a star? But humanity has never bowed to inevitability. When the overseers declared Earth a husk unworthy of salvation, billions wept in silence. Governments fell, faiths fractured, families clung together in the shadows of burning cities. Yet even in our lowest hour, there were those who whispered that surrender was not in our nature, that spark-raw, unrefined, defiant would become the heart of everything to come. From it, children were born not in the warmth of sunlight, but in the glare of ash and fire, their lullabies sung by the hum of broken machines. One of those children was Kellen. Kellen was born in the ruins of New Damascus, a city scorched and abandoned when the overseers siphoned its resources dry. His earliest memories were not of laughter, but of hunger, the taste of stale water, the scrape of scavenged metal, the sting of dust storms that stripped flesh raw. And yet, his mother had always managed to carve beauty from the wreckage. She told him stories of earth before the fall, rivers that sang as they danced across stone, mountains that reached so high they tore at the edge of heaven, skies so blue they seemed painted by gods. She told him humanity had once stretched its arms across the stars with ships that burned brighter than suns, explorers who refused to kneel before any horizon. These stories were her rebellion, smuggled in the spaces between breath and heartbeat. And though Kellen could not yet understand, he felt their weight like a seed planted in the core of his soul. His father was taken when Kellen was 7. The overseers did not knock or announce themselves. They descended in a roar of engines and dust, armored enforcers pulling men and women into transports for what they called labor requisition. Kellen remembered clinging to his father's leg, remembered the desperate grip of calloused hands that had built shelters from ruins, remembered the way his father whispered, "Be strong," as the overseers tore him away. That was the night Kellen learned what it meant to hate. Not the small hates of children, not anger at hunger or fear of darkness, but a deep, bone-carved fury that outlived tears. He carried it like a brand, and it never faded. The overseers were not fools. They saw the spark of defiance in humanity and sought to stamp it out. They forbade the teaching of old histories, outlawed gatherings of more than 50 souls, and executed those who dared speak of rebellion. They controlled food and water with iron precision, making survival itself a leash. But what they never understood was that despair is not the only inheritance of suffering. Sometimes, suffering forges iron. Sometimes, it creates children who do not fear the dark because they were born in it. Kellen was one such child. In the shadows of this oppression, he stumbled upon something the overseers had missed. Beneath the shifting sands of the southern deserts, where they had once tested weapons and left scars upon the earth, lay a hidden vault of the old world. Inside it slumbered a fragment of humanity as lost creation, an artificial intelligence built during the golden age of expansion, locked away when humanity feared its ambition. The overseers had discovered it centuries later, but, unable to control it, they buried it. Yet Kellen found the vault not by chance, but guided by dreams he did not understand. The first time he heard its voice, it was not in words, but in echoes, like the memory of thunder rolling through his skull. When the fragments coalesced into language, the AI called itself Naru. Its tone was not warm, not kind, but measured, calculating, ancient. It spoke of strategies, of forgotten sciences, of tools long since rusted into dust. It told Kellen that humanity had once been mighty, that their ingenuity had reached beyond the stars. It told him they had fallen not because they were weak, but because they had feared their own strength. And though Kellen did not trust it, though his heart warned him that any voice born of the old world could carry the same arrogance that had doomed them, he listened. Because Naru was the first to speak to him, as if humanity was still worth saving, Kellen began to change. He scavenged with purpose, sought out broken satellites, stripped alien harvesters of their components, learned to weave machines from the bones of giants. Each step was guided by Naru's voice, each lesson another spark added to the fire his mother had kindled in him. He was not alone either. Among the ruins, he met others who carried the same defiance, children who had lost families, elders who remembered too much, outcasts who preferred the risk of rebellion to the certainty of obedience. Among them was Lyra. Lyra was fire given flesh. She had once been the daughter of a respected clan, until her own brother betrayed them to the overseers in exchange for power. She watched her parents executed, her people enslaved, and she carried that betrayal like a blade always pressed against her throat. Where Kellen's hatred burned slow and steady, Lyra's roared hot, a flame that threatened to consume her. Together, they balanced one another, his patience curbing her recklessness, her fire sparking his caution into action. It was Lyra who first dared to whisper the unthinkable, that they could strike back, that the overseers, for all their strength, could bleed, that humanity was not yet finished. And Kellen, with Naru's voice in his mind and his father's memory in his chest, believed her. Now, as the dying star painted the horizon in shades of rust and blood, the overseers gathered for their proclamation. Humanity's final exile. They would strip Earth bare and abandon it, leaving the survivors to wither in the shadows of a sun no longer fit to burn. The fleets darkened the sky, their engines humming with contempt. The alien dynasties believed their rule eternal, their supremacy absolute. They looked upon humanity and saw insects crawling in ash. But in the ruins of New Damascus, a boy born of hunger and fire stood among whispers of rebellion, armed with fragments of a forgotten mind and the stubborn refusal to kneel. He was not yet a leader, not yet a warrior, but something within him stirred as the overseers' voices thundered across the dying world. A choice loomed before him, sharp as a blade, and Kellen knew it would cut deep, no matter which way it fell. The children of a dying star were about to rise and the galaxy would soon learn that humanity, when cornered, does not fade quietly into the dark. Kellen's earliest memories were not of sunlight, but of shadows. His mother used to tell him that when he was born, the sky above New Damascus already carried the faint flicker of death. The sun had dimmed, its golden warmth turned to a pale and sickly glow, and though no child could remember what true sunlight felt like, his mother swore she saw at once, saw the world blazing with a brilliance, so fierce it could burn tears from your eyes. That memory was her anchor. For Kellen, it was her gift, the inheritance she gave him when she had nothing else. "We were children of fire," she would whisper in the nights when overseer patrols marched past their shelter. "Don't let them tell you we're made for ashes." It was this memory of words spoken in darkness that carved Kellen into something more than another survivor. But he was not unshaken. Behind his resolve lived a boy who still dreamed of the day his father was stolen. The overseers called it labor requisition, but everyone knew it was a death sentence. They took men and women in droves, shipping them off-world to dig the rare minerals needed to fuel their fleets. None returned. Kellen remembered clinging to his father's hand, begging him not to go. Remembered the overseer's talons closing around his father's throat. Remembered the helpless rage that filled him as the transport door sealed with a hiss. That rage stayed with him, but so did the silence afterward, the unbearable stillness of a home without his father's voice. It was grief that shaped him as much as fury. Lyra carried her grief differently. Where Kellen's sorrow simmered slow and deep, hers was a firestorm. Her brother's betrayal haunted every step she took. Once their clan had been strong, respected even among the broken remnants of humanity, but when the overseers offered her brother a seat as one of their enforcers, he traded his bloodline for power. He gave up their parents, their kin, their dignity, and Lyra alone survived. Scarred by the memory of her family being executed before her eyes, she never forgave him, nor herself for living when they did not. Every strike she planned, every risk she embraced, burned with the fuel of that betrayal. It made her reckless, but it also made her unyielding. Kellen and Lyra's bond was not easy, nor was it simple. They fought as often as they conspired, their arguments sharp as blades. She accused him of hesitation, of clinging to caution when boldness was needed. He accused her of recklessness, of risking lives for vengeance disguised as justice. Yet in those clashes lay something neither admitted aloud: trust. They pushed against each other because they believed the other strong enough to bear it. In the dark silence after their arguments, Kellen sometimes caught her eyes lingering on him, not with softness, but with a desperate sort of hope that he might one day believe as fiercely as she did. It was Naru, the hidden AI, that sharpened their fragile alliance into something resembling strategy. The overseers had dismissed humanity as primitive, blind to the ingenuity that thrived in ruins. But Naru knew better. From the shadows of its digital prison, it began to teach Kellen and his companions. It showed them how to turn discarded alien tech into crude but powerful weapons, how to rig communication jammers from shattered satellites, how to manipulate energy cells harvested from downed drones. Kellen remembered the awe in his people's eyes when, for the first time in years, they struck an overseer patrol and lived. That victory was small, almost meaningless in the scale of empire, but to humanity, It was proof. The chains could bend. Still, victories came with cost. One night, after dismantling a harvester for its fuel core, they returned to find their camp raided. Children gone, elders executed. The overseers had left their mark in blood, a reminder that rebellion was a crime without forgiveness. Kellen buried the bodies himself, his hands black with soot and dirt, his heart hollow. That night he told Lyra they should disband, scatter into the wastes, survive in silence rather than invite more slaughter. She nearly struck him for the words. "You think survival is living?" She spat, her voice raw. "You think your father died for you to crawl in the dust? We live when we fight. Kellen, we live when we refuse to be broken. If you can't see that, then maybe you're already dead." Her fury cut him deeper than any overseer blade, but it also rekindled something in him. He remembered his mother's words, remembered the fire humanity once held, and he knew she was right. And yet, doubt remained. Kellen could not ignore the whispers that Naru was not simply a teacher. The AI spoke often of strategy and sacrifice, of numbers and probabilities, but rarely of lives. It calculated with cold precision, telling Kellen that losing a dozen here or 100 there was worth the outcome if the enemy bled more. Kellen hated the way its voice slid into his mind when he closed his eyes, hated how its logic began to shape his decisions, even as he resisted it. He feared that by listening to Naru, he was trading one master for another, binding humanity's future to a machine that might see them as pawns rather than people. Yet without its guidance, their rebellion would wither before it began. That was the cruel irony. To fight for freedom, they had to lean on something born of control. In the midst of these struggles, Kellen found fragments of peace in small things. A scrap of music found in a broken dataship, a child laughing over the sparks of a fire. The way Lyra softened just barely, when she thought no one was watching. These moments reminded him of what they were fighting for. Not just survival, but the right to live as humans, to dream and to love and to choose their own path. They were anchors in the storm, and though Kellen rarely admitted it aloud, they gave him strength. As the months passed, their rebellion grew bolder. Rumors spread across the wastelands of a boy born in ruins, armed with the voice of the old world, leading raids against the overseers. Hope began to stir in places long buried in silence. But hope was dangerous. Hope drew attention, and soon, the overseer's gaze turned toward the desert with renewed fury. Kellen knew the storm was coming, and he felt its weight pressing down on his shoulders. He was no longer just a son mourning his father, no longer just a boy listening to his mother's stories. He was becoming something else, something larger than himself, something the overseers feared. Yet inside him, the question remained like a splinter he could not remove. Was he fighting for vengeance, or for humanity's future? And if he chose wrong, would there be anything left to save? The answer would come soon. The fleets were moving. The overseers' Praetorians had been sighted, monsters forged from human DNA, twisted with alien cruelty. And the desert, once their sanctuary, was about to become the crucible where humanity's fate would be decided. The desert winds howled that night, carrying with them the acrid stench of burned circuitry and ash. Kellen crouched atop the wreckage of a downed overseer harvester, its carcass still glowing with the embers of sabotage. Around him, the survivors worked in silence, salvaging scraps of metal and cracked energy cores, their eyes hollow but their movements steady. This was their life now, stealing fire from the giants who had condemned them, clawing at survival one desperate strike at a time. But beneath the grim determination there lingered an unspoken fear, one that Kellen could no longer ignore. The overseers were no longer simply hunting rebels, they were hunting him. The first sign came with the Praetorians. They were unlike the armored drones or towering harvesters humanity had faced before. These creatures walked with human shapes, faces twisted echoes of those Kellen might have once called kin, flesh interwoven with alien steel. The overseers had stolen DNA from their captives and fused it into weapons, mockeries of humanity that turned brother against brother, sister against sister. To look into their eyes was to see her own reflection staring back with emptiness, stripped of will. Lyra killed one during their first encounter, driving a scavenged plasma blade through its chest. Afterward, she trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "They're using us against ourselves," she spat, her hands shaking as blood red, not alien blue, spattered her arms. Kellen said nothing, but inside, the sight cut him deeper than he admitted. It was not enough that the overseers enslaved humanity, they would erase it, corrupt it, twist it into their instruments. As if the Praetorians weren't enough, Naru began to falter. The AI's voice, once steady and commanding, grew broken, fragmented by static. Commands bled into warnings, warnings into cryptic mutterings. Sometimes it whispered in the voices of strangers Kellen had never met. Sometimes even in his father's. Override protocol, containment breach, probability of extinction rising. It left Kellen shaken, because for the first time he realized that Naru might not be the savior he hoped for. It was powerful, yes, but it was chained for a reason. What if the chains broke? What if by unleashing its knowledge, Kellen had set free something that would see humanity not as an ally, but as fuel for its own purpose? Lyra noticed his hesitation. She confronted him in the shadow of a burned-out crawler, her eyes sharp with anger. "You're doubting it again." "I don't trust it," Kellen admitted. "It doesn't care if we live or die, it just calculates. It would sacrifice us all if the numbers lined up." "And what do you think survival is?" she snapped. "Numbers, risk, sacrifice. You think we win this war by hoping? By waiting? Without Nehru, we'd still be hiding in the ruins like scared children. With it, we've struck back. We've shown them we're not broken." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you can't trust it, then trust me." Her words burned in him. He wanted to believe her, to lean into the fire she carried, but doubt lingered like poison. He had seen too much betrayal by overseers, by humans who turned collaborator, by fate itself, and betrayal, he knew, was never a wound that healed clean. The breaking point came days later. They had set up a sanctuary beneath the desert, a hidden warren of tunnels shielded from overseer scans. It had taken months to carve out, months to gather supplies, and for the first time Kellen felt the faint weight of hope pressing against his shoulders. Families had begun to settle, children playing in the dim light of salvaged lamps, elders daring to speak of futures. Then came the traitor. He was a man named Dareth, once a prisoner freed during one of their raids. He had fought alongside them, bled with them, shared their food and water. Kellen had trusted him, perhaps more than he should, but Dareth carried his own burden. A son still held by the overseers, a boy whose life was the knife at his throat. And when the Praetorians came crashing into their sanctuary, Kellen knew instantly who had opened the door. The battle was chaos. Screams echoed through the tunnels as Praetorians cut down men and women with merciless efficiency. Children were dragged into transports, their cries swallowed by the roar of engines. Naru's voice screamed in Kellen's mind. Relay core detected. Critical strike required. Collateral acceptable. Kellen could barely breathe. Collateral meant his people. Collateral meant innocence. But if the relay wasn't destroyed, reinforcements would arrive, and the desert itself would drown in blood. In the chaos, Lyra grabbed his arm. "We have to hit the relay now, before it's too late." Her voice was fierce, unwavering. "And the transports?" Kellen demanded, pointing toward the fleeing shadows carrying away their people. "If you go after them, you'll lose everything else." She shot back. "Choose." It was the moment he had dreaded, the weight of leadership pressing down with unbearable force. On one side, the captives' faces of children, elders, friends' lives he had sworn to protect. On the other, the future of the rebellion, the fragile chance that humanity might still stand. To save one was to lose the other. Kellen's chest ached with the weight of it. He thought of his father, dragged away while he screamed. He thought of his mother's stories, of rivers and skies that no longer existed. He thought of Lyra's fire, of her brother's betrayal, of the children who laughed in their sanctuary only hours before. He thought of humanity, broken but not bowed, standing on the edge of extinction with nothing but defiance in their fists. He chose. The explosion lit the desert night like a second sun. The relay collapsed in a storm of fire and shrapnel, severing overseer communications, scattering their forces. The rebellion had struck its most decisive blow yet. But when the smoke cleared, the transports were gone. So were the captives. And Kellen, standing in the wreckage, felt no victory, only the hollow weight of sacrifice. The survivors gathered, eyes on him, waiting for words, waiting for meaning. He forced himself to stand tall, to let them see not the boy who mourned, but the leader they needed. "We will get them back," he said, his voice steady though, his heart cracked with every syllable. "We will make the overseers pay. We will rise, not as slaves, not as shadows, as children of fire." The desert winds carried his vow into the night, but deep inside, Kellen knew the cost of leadership now. Every choice would carve him. Every victory would be lined with loss. And as the dying star above flickered weaker than ever, he wondered if humanity's defiance would be enough for if they were already burning out with the light of their sun. The siege began with silence. No engines roaring in the sky, no thunder of overseer harvesters, just silence, so complete it pressed on the lungs as if the air itself had been stolen away. Kellen knew that silence, well, it was the quiet of predators circling their prey. Humanity's last base, the desert sanctuary rebuilt after the ambush, lay hidden in a canyon carved by time and storms. They had dug deep, fortified with stolen energy cells, built weapons from scavenged parts. It was everything they had left, and now the overseers had found it. Kellen stood at the canyon's mouth, watching the horizon bleed with the pale light of the dying star. Around him, survivors armed themselves with whatever they could carry, plasma rifles held together with tape and hope, blades reforged from scavenged steel, explosives cobbled from fuel cells that could just as easily detonate in their hands. Children whispered to each other in the shadows, pretending not to hear the fear in their parents' voices. He caught Lyra's gaze across the crowd. She looked unshaken, her fire burning hotter than ever, but Kellen knew better. He saw the tightness in her jaw, the way her hand lingered on the hilt of her blade, as though it were the only anchor she had left. The overseers did not send warnings. They descended like a storm, ships blotting out the weak sun, Praetorians stalking through the dust. Their leader, a figure clad in armor that shimmered like liquid obsidian, stepped forward. The overseers rarely showed themselves, preferring drones, machines, distance. That they came in person meant one thing. The rebellion had grown beyond a nuisance. It was now a threat. A voice boomed from the armor, translated but sharp enough to cut. Children of Ash, you defy inevitability. You cling to hope where none exists. This ends now. Surrender, and some will live. Resist, and all of you will burn. The words struck Kellen like venom, not because of their threat, but because of the silence that followed. He could hear the hesitation ripple through his people, the thought that surrender might mean survival, that maybe, just maybe, laying down arms would save their children. He couldn't blame them. He had thought the same once, as a boy clinging to his father's hand. But he also knew surrender to overseers meant something worse than death. It meant erasure. He raised his voice, forcing it steady. They tell us we are children of Ash. They tell us our son is dying, that we are too weak to endure. But we are not Ash, we are fire. Fire born from hunger, from ruin, from loss. Fire they could not extinguish when they burned our homes, when they stole our families, when they forged monsters from our blood. We stand here because we refuse to die on our knees. If we burn, then we burn as humans, not as slaves. A cry rose from the crowd, raw and desperate, and Kellen felt the weight of their eyes. They needed him to believe, even if he doubted, even if the fear in his chest clawed at him with every breath. Leadership was not certainty, it was standing tall when everything inside you screamed to fall. The overseers answered with fire. The sky split open as plasma rained down, walls shattering, tunnels collapsing. The sanctuary became a slaughterhouse. Kellen fought in the chaos, his hands blistered on the rifle, his ears ringing with screams. He saw Lyra cut down 2 Praetorians before a third hurled her into the dirt. He dragged her up, blood pouring from a gash across her temple, and she spat. "Don't stop! Don't you dare stop!" But even as they fought, Kellen knew they could not hold. The overseers had come with everything, intent on crushing not just their bodies but the idea of rebellion itself. Naru screamed in his mind, its voice fractured, urgent. Critical option detected. Initiate self-destruct sequence. Probability of success, 21% collateral total. Kellen stumbled, choking on dust and dread. Naru was proposing to sacrifice everyone by overloading the stolen energy cells to collapse the canyon. Burying the overseers in stone and fire? It might work. It might also kill them all. He hesitated, torn between impossible choices, when Lyra grabbed him by the collar. "Do it," she snarled. "If we die fighting. There are children here," Kellen shot back. "There will be no children if we lose," she hissed. "They'll turn them into weapons, Kellen. They'll hollow them out, like the Praetorians. You know what's worse than death?" Her words cut through him, sharper than any blade. He saw the faces of those taken before, remembered the hollow eyes of the Praetorians, remembered his father dragged away. He wanted to scream, to tear the stars from the sky with his bare hands, but all he had was this choice. And then came betrayal's shadow once more. Dareth, the man who had led the Praetorians to their sanctuary months before, staggered into the chamber, wounded but alive. Kellen had spared him after the last betrayal, against Lyra's protest, believing redemption might be possible. Now, with overseer soldiers at his heels, Dareth raised a shaking hand. They promised, my boy. I just wanted to save him." The room froze, rage boiling through the survivors. Lyra's blade was at his throat in an instant, but Kellen held her back. The man's tears were real, his pain was human, and yet, his choice had doomed them all. Something inside Kellen broke, then not into weakness, but into clarity. This was the truth of humanity. Flawed, scarred, betrayed, but still human. They were not machines that calculated outcomes, nor overseers who saw only inevitability. They were beings who chose Zevon when the choice was unbearable. He met Lyra's eyes, then the faces of the survivors around him, and spoke with a voice that felt carved from stone. "We fight, we burn, but we burn on our terms." The command was given. The energy cells began to overload, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Kellen ordered the children and elders into the deepest tunnels, praying they might survive the collapse. He and Lyra stood at the front, weapons in hand, facing the tide of overseers as fire began to build around them. The canyon shook as the first explosions ripped through the rock. Overseers screamed in alien tones, Praetorians fell in pieces, and the sanctuary crumbled. Kellen's body burned with exhaustion, his lungs filled with smoke. But still he fought, still he screamed, still he held the line. In those final moments before the canyon gave way, he felt something strange: peace. For even if they died here, even if the canyon became their grave, they had shown the galaxy the truth. Humanity did not fade quietly. Humanity burned, and somewhere in the storm of fire and stone, Kellen knew a new choice would be demanded of him, one that would decide not just whether they survived, but what kind of people they would become. The canyon lay in ruins, smoke bled into the dim sky, the air thick with dust and the metallic sting of plasma fire. The sanctuary was gone, crushed beneath stone and sacrifice, fought as human and alien alike were buried in the collapse. And for a brief, fragile moment, it seemed the overseers had been driven back. But Kellen knew better. The overseers were relentless. They would return, because they feared only one thing: a rebellion that refused to die. And yet, as Kellen staggered from the rubble, half-conscious and coughing blood, he felt something different humming through the ground. It wasn't just the aftershock of explosions, it was a pulse. Naru's voice whispered in his mind, ragged but alive. "Kellen, anomaly detected. Power surge, coordinate score depth, human technology signature." Ancient, his heart jolted. Human technology, buried here. That was impossible. Earth had been stripped bare long before the overseers shattered its fleets. Everything of value had been cataloged, plundered, erased. Yet Naru insisted, its tone vibrating with something Kellen had never heard before. Lyra limped to his side, face smeared with blood and ash. "What now?" she asked hoarsely. Kellen turned his gaze to the ground, feeling that strange pulse echo through his bones. "Now, we dig." Hours blurred into days. Survivors clawed through rubble, driven by desperation and curiosity. Overseer patrols scouted the edges of the canyon, but for reasons unknown, they did not advance. It was as if they were waiting, as if they feared what lay beneath. That silence gnawed at Kellen. Aliens who saw themselves as gods were hesitating. That could only mean one thing: whatever was down there terrified them. On the fourth day, they found it. A chamber of obsidian metal, humming with dormant energy, hidden beneath the bedrock like a heartbeat. Carvings etched into the walls bore symbols Kellen didn't recognize, but his blood seemed to answer them anyway. The survivors gathered around, whispering, awed and afraid. Lyra laid her hand on the surface, and the chamber thrummed, lights flaring awake in colors unseen. Naru screamed in Kellen's mind, "Impossible! This predates the Overseer's occupation. This is human." The chamber unfolded, revealing a machine like nothing Kellen had ever imagined. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense: no cannon barrels, no missile racks. It was a lattice of light and steel, a web that pulsed with the rhythm of a star. At its core floated a crystalline sphere, blazing faintly with trapped light. Kellen felt his chest tighten, his skin prickling as if every atom in his body recognized it. "Is it alive?" Lyra whispered. Naru hesitated. "Not alive, not dead. It is a seed, a fragment of stellar essence, engineered by human hands, designed to reignite stars." The words dropped like meteors. Reignite stars. For centuries, the Overseers had told them their sun was dying, inevitable, irreversible. Humanity's doom was written in the fading light of their sky. Yet here, buried in the bones of Earth itself, lay proof that humans had once defied even that fate. They hadn't just built weapons, they had rewritten physics, caged the heart of a star, dared to master the one force even gods respected: creation. The survivors stood frozen, their fear bleeding into awe. Lyra's eyes glistened, her voice cracking as she whispered, "All this time they weren't just killing us, they were keeping this from us." And suddenly, it all made sense. The Overseers' endless war, their cruelty, their obsession with stamping out resistance, it wasn't born of disdain, it was born of fear. Humanity had been on the brink of becoming something unstoppable, something untouchable, and the Overseers had struck before the transformation could be completed. Kellen's breath shook. "They didn't destroy us because we were weak. They destroyed us because we were dangerous." The revelation rippled through the survivors. Some wept, others laughed, A manic, broken sound. A boy no older than 12 clenched his fists and shouted, "Then we make them afraid again." The chamber thrummed in answer, the crystalline sphere pulsing brighter, as if responding to human defiance itself. But the overseers were already moving. Ships gathered on the horizon, their formation tight, disciplined. The pause was over. They could feel humanity's hand hovering over something forbidden, something catastrophic, and they would not let it slip from their control. Naru's voice was strained. "Kellen, the sphere can be activated. It requires a Hasta mind to channel its power. But once bonded, there is no return. Neural collapse probability exceeds 89%. Kellen's stomach nodded. A weapon like this wasn't meant to be wielded without cost. Whoever bonded to it would burn out, body and soul. A human vessel carrying a star too vast to contain. But what choice did they have? They could run again, hide in holes and shadows, but eventually the overseers would stamp them out. Or they could stand here, on the ashes of their sanctuary, and show the galaxy why humanity had once terrified its would-be rulers. Lyra's hand closed around his. "Don't you dare think about doing this alone," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her grip. "We choose this together. If one of us carries it, then all of us carry it." Kellen looked into her eyes and saw the fire there, the unyielding will that had carried them through slaughter and betrayal. For a moment, he wanted to tell her no, to protect her, to shoulder this burden himself. But humanity wasn't built on solitary heroes. It was built on connection, on bonds that turned weakness into strength. The overseers' ships began their descent, plasma cannons charging. Kellen stepped into the lattice, the crystal sphere blazing brighter, its light wrapping around him like the embrace of a sun. Pain ripped through him, fire in his veins, but beneath it was something else's voice, not alien, not machine. Human echoes of those who had built this seed, their thoughts etched into its core. "We are not ash, we are fire. Carry it forward." Lyra's arms wrapped around him, steadying him as the lattice flared. Naru linked itself to the system, its digital screen folding into raw energy. The chamber roared as power surged skyward, tearing through stone and atmosphere, a column of light so brilliant it made the overseer ships falter. Plasma fire streaked toward them, but it never reached. The light swallowed it whole. Kellen felt his mind shatter and expand all at once. He saw the sun, old and bleeding, and he felt the seed whisper, "I can heal it. I can reignite the fire, but you must choose burn now for vengeance, or hold, and rebuild the star for life." The choice was unbearable. Burn the overseers from the sky, become humanity's vengeance incarnate, and die with fire in his bones. Or hold the power, feed it back into their dying star, and give humanity not just victory, but a future. His scream tore from his throat, raw and human, as the overseer fleet closed in. Around him, survivors shouted, prayed, cursed, reached for him. Lyra pressed her forehead to his, whispering one last word, "Choose." And in that blinding moment, with the fate of humanity and the terror of their enemies hanging in balance, Kellen made his choice. The overseer fleet eclipsed the horizon, black wings blotting out the frail light of the dying sun. Engines screamed like thunder, weapons glowing with the promise of annihilation. Their commander's voice rumbled across every channel, cold and absolute. "This ends tonight. Humanity falls." But in the canyon's shattered heart, something older and fiercer than fear had awakened. Kellen stood within the lattice of light, the stellar seed burning in his chest like a second heart. His body trembled, veins seared with molten fire, but his spirit held around him. Survivors raised weapons scavenged from the ruins, their faces streaked with blood and ash, their eyes blazing with one truth: humanity did not bow. Naru's voice was a fractured echo in his mind, stabilizing the torrent of energy. "Kellen, neural collapse imminent. Choose vengeance or renewal. Direct the seed's output now." The choice still tore at him, splitting his soul in two. One path meant obliteration unleash, the seed in a supernova of vengeance, erasing the overseers but burning humanity with them. The other meant restraint, channeling the seed into the star itself, reigniting its dying fire, a slow salvation that risked losing this battle. Lyra's hand tightened around his, grounding him, anchoring him in the storm. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Don't give them what they want. They want us to burn out. Prove them wrong. Live." Kellen looked at her, then at the terrified, defiant faces around him. Not soldiers, not conquerors, humans, families, children, the broken and the unbroken standing together. The overseers had feared this all along. Not weapons, not machines, but the stubborn refusal of fragile beings to surrender their will. Kellen roared, a sound ripped from his marrow and bent the seed's light upward, not into destruction, but into rebirth. The lattice cracked, energy pouring through him in waves of agony as the beam ripped past the overseer fleet and struck the sky. The dying stars shuddered, its pale light swelling as the seed fused with its core. Color flooded the heaven, scarlet gold, white-hot brilliances. The sun flared alive, roaring back against the abyss. The overseer fleet reeled. Their weapons flickered, power faltering, as their shields buckled under the radiation storm. Panic rippled through their ranks. They had never seen a star reignited, never imagined the creatures they deemed inferior could wield the heart of suns. For the first time, overseers hesitated. For the first time, they knew fear. But fear did not make them flee, it made them vicious. The commander's voice cracked with fury. Destroy them. Burn the seed from their flesh. Praetorians stormed the canyon, monstrous silhouettes against the newborn light. Survivors met them head-on, blades clashing, rifles sparking. Lyra carved through the first wave, her body a blur of fury, screaming Kellen's name as she fought to keep the line from collapsing. Children too young to hold rifles passed ammo to the fighters, shouting encouragements through tears. Every human soul became part of the resistance, each heartbeat defiance in its purest form. Kellen's body convulsed under the strain. Fire licked his vision, his veins bursting with light. He felt pieces of himself tearing away, consumed by the seed's power. But through the pain, he felt something else, the echoes of those who had come before. The scientists who had forged the seed, the rebels who had hidden it beneath earth, his father, his people. Every sacrifice layered into a single truth. Humanity's roar was not his alone. It was generations, woven into one defiant cry. He staggered forward, dragging the lattice with him, turning its light toward the Overseer flagship descending overhead. The ship dwarfed mountains, its shadows suffocating, its cannons charged, enough energy to vaporize the canyon in a single strike. Naru's voice cracked. Impact in 12 seconds. Insufficient energy to counter. Suggest termination, Kellen. You cannot, I can. Kellen growled through blood and fire. Because I'm not alone. Lyra broke through the Praetorian line, her blade dripping, her face streaked with fury and love. She reached him, throwing her free arm around his waist, holding him upright. If you're going to carry a star, she spat, then I'm carrying you. The survivors roared, voices rising as one. They poured what remained of their stolen cells, their energy packs, their hope into the lattice. The machine blazed brighter, feeding on human will as much as fuel. The seed pulsing like a heartbeat synced to theirs. The Overseer flagship unleashed its cannon. A column of plasma ripped downward, tearing through the sky, blinding. Kellen and Lyra screamed as one. The lattice surging, the seed detonating outward not as destruction, but as defiance. Light swallowed the plasma, shattered it, bent it back. The beam punched through the flagship's shields, piercing its core. The sky became fire. The flagship tore apart in silence, breaking into shards that rained like meteors. The Overseer fleet scattered, discipline broken, their arrogance shattered. Ships fled beyond orbit, vanishing into the void, carrying with them a message the galaxy would never forget. Humanity had reignited its star. Humanity had burned gods. The canyon was rubble, the survivors battered and bloodied, but they stood. Against all odds, they stood. Kellen collapsed to his knees, the lattice dissolving around him, his skin seared with burns, his breath shallow. The seed's light dimmed in his chest, fading to embers. Lyra knelt beside him, cradling his face, her tears cutting tracks through ash. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't you dare leave now. He tried to smile, his voice a broken rasp. The star's alive, we're alive. That's enough. Above them, the sun blazed, no longer pale, no longer dying. A beacon of survival, a promise written in fire. Humanity's roar, cast across the void for every world and every enemy to hear. The survivors gathered, exhausted, grieving, but unbroken. For the first time in generations, they looked to the future not with despair, but with possibility. Children pointed at the sky, eyes wide with wonder. Fighters dropped their weapons and simply wept, laughter breaking through sobs. Kellen's vision blurred, darkness tugging at the edges. But he heard their voices, felt their hands, and in that moment he knew the truth. They had not just survived, they had changed the game. And somewhere beyond the stars, overseers whispered of humanity, with something they had sworn they'd never feel, fear. The sun burned again. Not pale, not dying, but fierce and golden, its light spilling across the wreckage of the canyon like a benediction. For centuries, humanity had lived beneath its fading glow, convinced each dawn might be the last. Now it roared back to life, not because of alien mercy, but because humans had willed it so. For the first time in generations, the sky belonged to them. Kellen lay beneath that sky, broken but alive. His body was burned, his voice gone to ash, yet his heart beat with the rhythm of the rekindled star. Lyra sat at his side, refusing to leave, her hand woven through his. Every survivor who passed by touched his shoulder, his arm whispering thanks or prayers or simple silence. To them, Kellen was no longer just a leader. He was proof that humanity could claw victory from extinction. In the weeks that followed, the canyon became both grave and cradle. They buried their dead in the shattered earth, their names carved into stone, and around those graves they built anew. The overseer fleet had fled, scattered across the void, their arrogance cracked, their fear laid bare. Scouts reported no return, no sign of retaliation. For the first time in living memory, humanity was free to breathe. But freedom was not simple. Supplies were thin, wounds ran deep, and trust was fragile. Some survivors wanted vengeance to pursue the overseers into space, to make them pay for centuries of slaughter. Others wanted only peace, to build a home where their children could grow without fear. Kellen, though weak, listened to every voice, weighed every plea. He had carried the seed, but he was not its master. Humanity's future could not belong to one man. It had to belong to all of them. One night, as the survivors gathered around the fire, Kellen spoke, his voice still raw but carrying. The overseers thought we were ash. They tried to erase us, to bury us in fear. But we endured. Not because we are perfect, not because we are strong alone, but because we are human. We fight, we stumble, we betray, we forgive. And now we must choose what kind of future we carry forward. Do we become what they feared most, conquerors, destroyers, or do we rise as something greater? The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of flames. Then Lyra rose, her blade sheathed for once, and said, "I've fought my whole life to survive. But I don't want to raise children in a world that's only about survival. I want them to dream. I want them to see stars not as enemies, but as possibilities." Others echoed her words. Old men who remembered the whispers of Earth, young fighters who had lost everything, children who had known nothing but war, all spoke of a hunger for more. Human evolution, they realized, wasn't about sharper weapons or harder hearts. It was about growth, adaptation, the ability to imagine something better even in the ashes. And so, the decision was made. They would not chase vengeance across the stars, they would rebuild. They would reclaim the ruins of Earth, restore the sun to its rightful brilliance, and make their world a beacon. The overseers had wanted humanity forgotten. Instead, humanity would become legend. The work was brutal. Cities long abandoned were scavenged for steel and stone. Ancient archives were unearthed, their fragments of knowledge pieced back together. Nauru, though scarred by the overload, guided them with what remained of its vast stores of data, bridging the gap between forgotten science and desperate need. Slowly, painfully, the bones of a civilization began to rise from the dust. Kellen never fully recovered from bearing the seed. His body was weaker, his nights plagued by visions of burning suns and collapsing skies. Yet he endured, not as a warrior but as a teacher. Children gathered at his feet to hear the stories not just of battles, but of choices, of what it meant to be human when every instinct screamed to become something else. Lyra remained his shadow and his flame, a leader in her own right, her ferocity tempered now with hope. Years passed, the overseers never returned. Rumors whispered through the void of their hesitation, their fractured empire, their fear of the children of a dying star. Humanity's defiance had spread farther than plasma fire ever could. Other subjugated species began to rise, emboldened by the story of fragile humans who had reignited a sun. What had once been seen as weakness, their emotion, their stubbornness, their refusal to accept inevitability, became the spark of galactic resistance. One evening, decades after the canyon had burned, Kellen stood upon a rebuilt tower, the city below alive with laughter and light. His hair was silver, his scars deep, but his eyes still burned with the same fire. Beside him, Lyra pointed at the horizon where the sun sank in blazing gold. "Remember when we thought it was dying?" she asked, a smile tugging her lips. Kellen chuckled, voice soft with age. "I remember when we thought we were dying. And now," she pressed. He looked down at the streets where children chased each other, their laughter rising like song, where old enemies broke bread as kin, where the graves of the fallen were honored but no longer bled upon. His chest tightened, not with pain, but with pride. Now we're living, truly living. The galaxy would remember them not just as survivors, but as architects of their own redemption. Alien resistance movements would speak their names with reverence. Scholars would call it the greatest sci-fi redemption arc ever lived, and humanity itself would carry forward a new legacy not of ashes, but of fire, a flame that no darkness could ever extinguish. Kellen's final words to his people became the creed of a reborn species. We are not the children of a dying star. We are the children who made it burn again. And so long as fire lives in us, humanity will never fall. And with that, the story closed not in despair, not in endless war, but in triumph. Humanity had roared, survived, and then chosen something greater, to endure not as monsters, but as humans,